Russia has repeatedly relied on its massive stocks of tanks and armoured vehicles to assert dominance in Ukraine. And despite losing thousands of tanks since the war began, it continues to make more and send them over the border and into contested frontline territories. But Ukraine has a secret weapon, a super smart artillery shell capable of raining down fire and slaughtering Russian tanks before their commanders have any chance to react or retreat. There's no way for Russia to counter this shell, and no escape for any targets in its sights. It's called the bonus shell, developed in Sweden and deployed in the battlefields of Ukraine, and it's one of the most powerful pieces of the Ukrainian anti-tank arsenal. That arsenal also includes a range of other effective weapons, like US-made fire-and-forget Javelin missiles and British NLAWs, which are particularly helpful in urban settings. Ukraine has also made use of anti-tank mines and kamikaze drones to strike back at Russian tanks and armoured vehicles. All of those weapons have worked well, but they all face a similar problem. Tanks and other military vehicles are often deployed in strategic columns, with one leading the way and the rest of the convoy following behind, especially along the narrow roads that wind across the rural regions of Ukrainian borderlands. If Ukrainian soldiers use missiles to strike the first tank in the column, the others quickly react. They hear the blast, see the smoke, and take evasive action. They may deploy smoke grenades to mask their locations, for example, before retreating into safer positions and gaining time to plan their next move. That makes it so much harder, almost impossible in fact, for Ukrainian soldiers on the ground to deal more damage or destroy any additional vehicles. They lose their advantage in an instant. It's in those moments that the bonus shell shines. The history of this smart artillery shell dates all the way back to 1985 when development first began. The Swedish military wanted to create a smart anti-tank weapon with a reasonably long range of more than 16 miles or 25 kilometers. It needed to be able to release a pair of self-contained submunitions in midair, which could then identify and lock onto their targets from above before bringing devastation down onto the enemy's heads. It was an incredibly ambitious concept, and it took a number of years to come to fruition. Sweden's defense experts teamed up with French counterparts, combining the technologies and military minds of both countries to bring their idea to life. And it wasn't until 1998, more than a decade after development began, that the first bonus shells entered production. Here's how the bonus works. First, it's loaded into a standard NATO 155mm artillery tube and launched into the air, following a conventional ballistic arc and travelling up to 21.7 miles or 35 kilometers. After ascending into the air, a time fuse inside the nose of the shell ignites. The nose covers opens up and the two submunitions, neatly concealed within the body of the shell, are released. Each of the submunitions is equipped with little winglets and begins to spin in the sky, rotating at 900 revolutions a minute. And no sooner have they emerged into the open air than the submunitions also begin scanning the surrounding area for viable targets. Because, while they may appear simple at first glance, these submunitions have a stack of state-of-the-art technology hidden beneath their glossy exteriors. Each one is equipped with an embedded electronic module, fitted with an infrared matrix sensor, a LiDAR scanner, and a high-speed processor unit too. It's like having a miniature, radar-powered explosive strike station floating in the sky, scanning the battlefield with a bird's-eye view, ready to wipe out even the toughest of enemy tanks. The built-in sensors first send out a heat signature, seeking to spot any large metal masses in the area and separate potential targets from the rest of the landscape. They then employ silhouette parameters to discern specific target types like Russian T-72 and T-90 tanks, or BMP-3 infantry fighting vehicles and BTR-82 armoured personnel carriers. This helps to ensure that the smart bonus munitions only fire on the targets that matter most, and that they aren't inadvertently wasted on the likes of cheap jeeps or abandoned tractors on the agricultural land that makes up a large part of frontline battlefields. Once the sensors and scanners have identified a genuine valuable target, the final phase begins. The submunition detonates its explosive payload, creating an explosively formed projectile which blasts towards its target at supersonic speeds. In the blink of an eye, the explosive strikes. And here's the important part. It hits tanks and other enemy vehicles directly from above, where military vehicles often have their weakest points. The Russian T-72 main battle tank, for example, has a notorious weakness due to the presence of an autoloader as part of its design. While the autoloader helps to cut the necessary tank crew size down to 3 people rather than the usual 4, it also poses a major risk to the entire crew. In order to work effectively, it needs quick and easy access to ammunition, which therefore has to be stored right below the tank's turret. A clean strike to the turret area can cause the whole interior to go up in flames, killing the tank gunner, commander and driver in a matter of seconds, and transforming the entire tank from a destructive military machine into a worthless pile of smoking scrap metal. Bonus shells are perfect for launching these sorts of impactful aerial attacks in just the right areas. Even against Russia's most modern and advanced tanks, like the T-90M, it proves effective, raining down on the notably thinner pieces of steel armor on the tank tops rather than the thicker sections along their front, sides and back. And if T-90Ms can't withstand a bonus shell strike, then Russia's other armoured vehicles have absolutely no chance. From BMP-2 and BMP-3 fighting vehicles to armoured personnel carriers, support vehicles and the decades-old Soviet-era tanks that Russia is desperately pulling out of storage facilities to deploy in places like Donetsk and Kherson, nothing is safe. And that's a huge advantage for Ukraine. It gives the country's armed forces an invaluable weapon to turn to in times of need. When the Russians roll out a large convoy in a strategic formation, for example, with rows of tanks and vehicles carefully positioned to minimize the risks from ground-based attacks, mines and drones, Ukraine can turn to the bonus shells to ruin Russia's day. Or, in cases where the enemy uses smoke grenades and similar strategies to hide its armor, making the likes of the Javelin and N-Law strikes far less effective, once more Ukraine can unleash the bonus. Because one of the best things about these shells is that there's no real way for Russia to counter them. Smoke grenades pose no problem to the bonus submunitions. They can see right through the smoke thanks to their smart sensors and scanning technologies. Other kinds of cover, like tree lines, are also ineffective. Even Russian electronic warfare measures have next to no impact on the bonus's lethality, since each munition uses its own learned dataset to identify and lock onto targets. The likes of GPS and GLONASS jammers are useless against that, and the same applies to Russia's Krasuka-4 mobile jamming stations too. No matter what Russia does, it can't stop the bonus shells striking its tanks and taking out expensive equipment ruthlessly and rapidly. Indeed, speed is another serious selling point of these Swedish smart shells. As previously mentioned, each submunition creates an explosive projectile that moves so fast there's no hope of Russian tanks, many of which have top speeds of less than 40 miles per hour, being able to carry out any kind of evasive maneuvers. They have to accept their fate and take the hit, which often triggers internal fires or additional explosions within the tank itself by striking either munition storage areas or even the tank engine itself. In seconds, the tank's internal systems are completely cut off and its crew either killed, knocked out by the impact of the blast, or desperately forced to flee their burning and broken vehicle. This entire scenario plays out in around 25 to 30 seconds, starting from the moment the shell is first fired. And this isn't just theoretical, it's actually happened on the battlefield, and there have been multiple recorded instances of Ukraine using bonus munitions against Russian armor. The first occurred in the fall of 2023. A Russian armoured column had been deployed in the Donetsk region, close to the city of Toretsk. The column was comprised of 3 BMP-2 armoured fighting vehicles. First introduced during the days of the Soviet Union, BMP-2s are still reasonably relevant and efficient vehicles, in spite of their age. They're equipped with 30mm auto cannons and have the ability to fire anti-tank guided missiles too, making them well suited to a wide range of combat scenarios. However, like a lot of Russian military vehicles, BMP-2s have weak armor across their top sections, rendering them highly vulnerable to aerial attacks. They were ideal targets for Ukraine to test out its bonus shells, And it didn't take long for images and footage to emerge showing the aftermath of the Ukrainian attack. They showed that the BMP turrets had somehow been detached from the bodies of the vehicles flying away into the air. The hulls, meanwhile, were ravaged by flames and secondary explosive damage. Upon closer inspection, each turret was also found to have a near-perfect circular hole right in its center, and it didn't take long for military analysts to understand what had happened. The only weapon capable of leaving that kind of mark was an explosively formed projectile, exactly the kind of projectile created by a bonus shell submunition. Only a week later, another Russian unit felt the full force of the bonus. This time, it was in the Svatove area in northern Luhansk. A full convoy of Russian vehicles were traversing the zone, including BMP-3 armoured personnel carriers, more modern and advanced than the BMP-2s, and T-80 BVM tanks, which rank among the stronger tanks in Russia's arsenal. But once more, they were no match for what Ukraine had in store. Ukrainian footage from the scene proved particularly interesting for analysts. There were no signs of drone attacks on the enemy vehicles, nor were there any missile trails in the skies. Instead, the cameras captured small mid-air explosions, sending lightning-fast projectiles into the bodies of the Russian vehicles. It was around this time that French sources dropped a veritable bombshell, revealing that they had supplied Ukraine with a limited number of bonus units, in addition to Caesar self-propelled howitzers. Then, in December 2024, Sweden announced it will send even more launchers and bonus shells to Ukraine. The list of weapons included in that package featured Archer self-propelled howitzers, plus multi-purpose precision 155mm ammunition, which is believed to include bonus munitions. In March 2025, Ukraine received another big bonus boost, with the Swedish Ministry of Defense authorizing the procurement of 18 additional Archer systems as part of a massive $295 million aid package, which could open up new firing opportunities for bonus shells all along the front lines. And while details of specific attacks are scarce, it seems that Ukraine has been using these shells with increasing frequency in recent months. The Oryx open source intelligence team, for example, noted that 41 of the 176 Russian tanks destroyed in the first 5 months of this year showed signs of vertical penetration damage from above and internal explosions, suggesting that they were most likely struck by bonus submunitions. What's more, it appears that Russia has not found any effective way to deal with this new deadly threat, which just goes to show how cleverly designed the bonus and its launchers truly are. Russia has reportedly tried to use its radar systems to track the launch trails of the shells, for example, in order to pinpoint the location of the artillery systems like Archers and Caesars. But those systems are highly mobile. They can fire a shell and leave the area in less than a minute, repositioning somewhere else before launching another bonus faster than Russia's radars can spot them. The Russians have also deployed various jammers in a bid to disrupt the bonus's targeting. But, as touched on earlier, that simply won't work. The bonus munitions use their own internal data and processor units to make decisions and strike targets. They don't need active GPS signals or anything like that. In other words, there's nothing for Russia to actually jam. Even when Russia equips its tanks with state-of-the-art defenses like Arena M hard-kill active protection systems, which have recently been fitted to T-90M tanks, they still have no hope of countering the bonus shells. The Arena M system uses radars to scan the tank's surroundings, spot any incoming threats, and deploy munitions to take them out before the point of impact. There's just one problem. Bonus submunitions move faster than the speed of sound and strike their targets directly from above. The Arena M radar has zero chance of spotting them and taking the necessary action in time to prevent catastrophic damage. And the same applies to pretty much any other active protection system in the Russian arsenal. They're all either too slow or lack the precision needed to stop a bonus strike. Even if Russia wanted to address its tanks' weaknesses and put thicker, stronger steel along the top sections, that wouldn't work either. The nature of the tank designs make it impossible to add reactive armor plates across the top sections. The tanks would become heavier, slower, and much more difficult to operate. For armored vehicles and troop carriers, it's an even grimmer picture. Those kinds of vehicles have significantly less armor and lack the kinds of active protection systems afforded to battle tanks. They may be more mobile, but that's not enough to save them from a bonus strike. There's also a colossal cost advantage for Ukraine in using bonus shells. Each one of these shells is said to cost around $100,000 to $150,000. That might seem like a lot, but Russian tanks and vehicles are worth a whole lot more. Some can be valued at millions of dollars per unit. And remember, each bonus contains not one but two submunitions, so a single shell can take out two high-value targets totaling up to $10 million. In other words, Ukraine can deal up to $100 of damage for every $1 spent on bonus strikes. That's incredible value. And it's particularly important at the moment with Russia's economy in an increasingly perilous position and its president, Vladimir Putin, having to back down and cut defense spending for 2026. Russian losses have been so vast over the course of the conflict so far. It's seen more than 1 million soldiers die or get injured, with around 500,000 said to be unable to ever return to the front lines. It's also seen thousands upon thousands of pieces of military hardware wiped out, including tanks, armored vehicles, personnel carriers, civilian vehicles, artillery systems, command posts, radar stations, jammers, air defenses, and more. At home, the country faces record-level labour shortages and other economic crises, and even Putin, despite his delusional proclamations, must be able to see that this situation is far from sustainable. His country cannot keep losing money and hardware at such a rapid rate. But with bonus shells ready and waiting to take out Russia's tanks and military vehicles, the losses are sure to keep on mounting up. It's also vital for Ukraine to have a strong supply of these shells at the moment, as Russia has recently resumed tank and vehicle-based ground attacks in key areas along the front lines. For quite a while, Kremlin commanders appear to have rewritten their doctrines, choosing to keep tanks in reserve and sending troops over the border, either on foot or aboard simple civilian vehicles, ranging from motorbikes to jeeps and even golf carts in some cases. It's believed that this was done to help offset the heavy tank and vehicle losses that Russia had suffered in the early stages of the war. This also gave the Russians time to produce more tanks at their various production plants, as well as repairing and modernizing very old Soviet-style tanks from decades gone by, like the T-92A, which dates all the way back to the late 1970s. Now, however, Russia appears to be rewriting its tactical rulebook once more. On July 27, for example, a huge convoy featuring over 70 vehicles, including T-72 tanks and BMP-3 personnel carriers, was seen traveling towards the city of Siversk in the Donetsk region. Fortunately, Ukraine managed to cleverly ambush the convoy, using a mixture of drones and other weapons to take out almost every single vehicle, catching the enemy completely off guard. Russian armored vehicles were also seen in the Pokrovsk area, traveling along a so-called road of death in an attempt to put pressure on the city. Once more, Ukraine proved victorious, with its valiant defenders using both drones and artillery to stop the enemy in their tracks. These victories are both worth celebrating, but they also come with a caveat. It appears that Russia may be willing to start using tanks and other vehicles more regularly from now on, and Ukraine has to be ready for that. Drones, mines and missiles will all work, but only to a certain extent. Other weapons, like the brilliant bonus shell, are absolutely necessary to disrupt the stronger convoys and take out high-value targets, even when smoke, cover and camouflage are being used to protect them. Thankfully, it appears Ukraine has a strong supply of bonus munitions, and it clearly knows how to use them. Now, learn more about how Ukraine's allies are helping the nation stay strong in the face of increasing Russian aggression in our video detailing Portugal's powerful military and humanitarian aid. Or check out our in-depth analysis of how Ukraine is slowly but surely becoming one of the world's leading military superpowers, strong enough even to surpass its biggest enemy. And finally, make sure to subscribe to our channel too, so you can stay informed on everything that's happening on the ground in Ukraine and in other important conflicts and regions around the globe.